Be honest, which one of us hasn't had moments of mistakes, private secrets we only wish to keep to ourselves? Imagine the spine-chilling sensation when those very moments are captured entirely by a hidden camera, and suddenly it turns into a weapon forcing you to trade your entire career just to keep the secret. In Hollywood, this game is far more brutal. Hidden cameras or recording devices at parties are never operating by accident. A single captured moment of carelessness is all it takes to instantly turn a superstar's life upside down. The power brokers use those very sensitive reels as tools to extort, leverage, and dethrone them right at the pinnacle of fame. The shocking truths lurking in the shadows of the spotlight are about to be exposed right now. All will be revealed in the video. 17 black celebrities who were secretly recorded in their most embarrassing moments. 1. Brenda Sykes, the 3 a.m. trap and the orchestrated ruin of a muse. In the eyes of the late 1970s media, Brenda Sykes was one of the most promising faces of the blaxploitation genre, thanks to her pure appearance. However, her life took a different turn due to a misguided romantic decision: a secret relationship with Jim Brown, an A-list action star and powerful former NFL superstar in Hollywood. Jim Brown was a box office magnate, but his marriage to Sue Jones was, in reality, cold and only maintained on paper to protect their reputation and multi-million-dollar contracts. Naively, Brenda believed Brown's promise that he would use his influence to help her land a heavy role in a major drama project from Paramount, a chance to shed her B-movie actor label. However, Brenda never expected that she had fallen into a sophisticated trap set up by Sue Jones in coordination with the studio's board of directors. To protect assets before a potential divorce, Sue actively created gaps to allow Brenda to sneak into the villa at night, causing her to be subjective and leave openings. That fateful 3:14 a.m. was meticulously scripted. Brenda's sports car tires were intentionally deflated in the villa basement beforehand. When she left, Jim Brown pretended not to know and advised her to walk to the dark back gate to catch a taxi. He promised he had called for her. In reality, there was no taxi. Waiting for her was a private detective hired by Sue Jones with a powerful telephoto lens camera and high-capacity flash. As Brenda stepped through the iron gate, the flash went off continuously, causing her to panic. The camera captured the most shameful moment of her life. She only had time to throw a thin coat over her disheveled silk pajamas, exposing her body. Running away in the night, she tripped on the damp ground, snapping the strap of her high heel. The close-up photos captured the scene of her kneeling on the ground, one hand pulling her nightgown flap, the other holding the broken shoe, her face contorted in panic with mascara running down her eyes due to tears and sweat. This was the humiliating proof that nailed her title as a homewrecker. This truth was hushed up. The media only knew that she suddenly withdrew from the Paramount project for personal reasons. In reality, the very next morning, Sue Jones and the studio lawyers sent an ultimatum forcing her to silently withdraw. Otherwise, they would blast these revealing photos onto the covers of the most scandalous rags. Due to extreme fear, Brenda had to accept. The top-secret file should have been destroyed, but Jim Brown's personal lawyer kept a copy as insurance for potential property disputes. Decades later, with the main subjects deceased and the aging attorney facing exorbitant medical bills, he sold the dossier to an investigative journalist. This belated leak exposed a brutal truth. Brenda Sykes was never more than a pawn, crushed beneath the wheels of Hollywood power. 2. Demond Wilson, the downfall of an icon and the backstage whitewashing conspiracy. In 1978, the American public knew Demond Wilson as Lamont Sanford, the good son in the legendary sitcom Sanford and Son. He was an icon of wholesomeness, carrying a gentle smile from the small screen into the hearts of millions. But behind that radiant aura lay a depleted Demond Wilson, hopelessly trapped in a stimulant addiction just to survive a frantic, punishing work schedule. On the fateful night of September 22, 1978, At the Caesars Palace showroom in Las Vegas, every mask was permanently ripped away before hundreds of onlookers. It was supposed to be a career-defining night, establishing him as a solo stand-up artist, but right in the middle of his routine, everything spiraled into a nightmare. Instead of roaring laughter, the showroom plunged into a deathly silence. Demond slumped over the microphone, his voice stammering, completely disoriented. His eyes went vacant, staring blankly into space as he began to babble incoherent words. This was no part of the act. It was the total, agonizing collapse of his nervous system under the crushing weight of stimulants. The ultimate humiliation was captured not by the house security system, but by a front-row spectator. Armed with a handheld 8mm camera, this individual recorded the entire horrific scene. Hotel security rushing the stage, dragging Demond Wilson away from the microphone while he was still muttering and thrashing in a blind panic. The sight of a beloved star grabbed by the collar and hauled away like a common vagrant before the eyes of the public dealt a fatal blow to the exemplary image he had painstakingly built. This incident should have been the definitive end of his career, if not for the immediate intervention of the entertainment industry's iron fists. That very night, Wilson's management deployed a lightning-fast whitewashing campaign. They locked down Caesars Palace, using a massive pre-arranged emergency slush fund to buy out the camera and film directly from the spectator. Hotel management was coerced into signing strict non-disclosure agreements, and the entire night's security footage was wiped clean under the guise of a technical malfunction. The scandal was completely buried. The next day, the mainstream media received only a brief statement claiming he had suffered from exhaustion due to overwork. Through studio cash and absolute clout, a death sentence to his honor was entombed in the dark. Demond Wilson maintained his wholesome persona for a short while longer before gradually fading away from Hollywood. That 8mm tape, alongside the signed silence agreements, remains locked inside the private archives of his former agency. A chilling testament to how Hollywood ruthlessly manufactures the truth to protect its golden geese. 3. Denise Nicholas, the 3 a.m. incident and the multi-million-dollar cover-up in the shadows. Denise Nicholas was once the very embodiment of pride and luxurious elegance, a talented role model who convinced 1970s audiences that she was an untouchable, sacred icon of Hollywood. Yet behind the extravagant parties on Sunset Boulevard lay a multi-million-dollar silence, buried deep within lifelong non-disclosure agreements that no soul ever knew existed. In the early hours of October 12, 1977, as the main hall of an exclusive, tight-lipped club on Sunset Boulevard vibrated with music and liquor, Denise quietly slipped away from the crowd into a dimly lit VIP room. This was no ordinary lounge for casual pleasure. It was a sanctuary of raw power, a meeting ground for figures who could shift political tides. Facing her in the dark corner was neither a co-star nor a lover, but an incumbent congressman, a married man, and the public face of major political campaigns. They believed they were shrouded in absolute privacy, but they were fatally wrong. A bar manager, planted to monitor underground transactions, had concealed a small camera deep in the corner of the room, capturing the stark contrast between their pristine public professionalism and a scandalous, uninhibited private tryst. The pinnacle of this degradation, the element that transformed the tape into a ticking time bomb, was the exact moment the man placed a thick envelope onto the table. It was no gift. It was the price of an arrangement, a covert agenda that, if exposed, would leave an indelible, permanent stain on both of their careers. When frames extracted from the camera began leaking through black market paparazzi, Hollywood stood on the precipice of a political earthquake. If the congressman's identity and his entanglement with Denise were exposed, her career would be branded as a malicious homewrecker, while the politician would be stripped of all his power. But absolute power spoke before the press could ever catch wind. Early on the morning of October 13, 1977, less than 24 hours after the incident, a black sedan pulled up outside the bar's office. A cutthroat legal team representing the congressman did not arrive to negotiate. They came to execute an order. Behind closed doors, the bar owner and the hidden cameraman were presented with an offer they could not refuse. A staggering sum of money sufficient for an early retirement anywhere in the world, bound to a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. The original film, the copies, and every single witness present that night were completely bought out, while the night shift staff were reassigned to distant locations, vanishing from Los Angeles within a week. Denise Nicholas continued to appear before the public with a flawless image, as if nothing had ever transpired. That footage never saw the light of day, resting silently inside a vault at a discreet California law firm, a chilling testament to how the ruling elite orchestrate reality, leaving the humiliation of that moment buried by cold cash, while the truth of that night remains a ghost haunting the dark corridors of Hollywood. 4. Lynn Hamilton, the cold voice behind the gold brooch and the unmasking of a national mother. All of Hollywood once admired Lynn Hamilton as the national mother, an image of virtue and warmth, who always appeared with a gentle smile and kind advice. Audiences believed in that purity, and critics celebrated that humility. Yet no one knew that beneath this flawless facade lay a calculating, manipulative machine. Everything began to shift on the eve of her receiving the most prestigious award of her career, when her cold ingratitude inadvertently created her most dangerous enemy, the trusted assistant who had served her for over a decade. In the final moments before casting this assistant out of her life without a single explanation or compensation, Lynn Hamilton had no idea that the luxurious gold brooch she wore would become the very instrument of her undoing. Driven by resentment accumulated from years of being treated like garbage, the assistant had cleverly attached a miniature recording device to the back of the brooch. As Lynn walked into an elite dinner with Hollywood's most powerful moguls, she maintained her familiar, saintly smile. But once the doors closed and she sat at the banquet table, believing she was in absolute privacy, a completely different Lynn Hamilton materialized. The 15-minute tape, which later sent shockwaves through the film capital, captured no drunken antics or loss of control. On the contrary, it was horrifying proof of cold, ruthless lucidity. Lynn's voice rang out, steely and calculating, as she casually detailed how she had orchestrated fake romantic scandals to smear and force a talented young actress out of the entertainment industry, solely out of fear that the girl would steal her spotlight. She mocked and laughed about using money to bribe critics to suppress other black colleagues, whom she always smilingly referred to as close co-stars whenever facing the camera lenses. Her cruelty and sheer contempt for the very people the public believed were her close friends unmasked the true face of a villain masquerading as a saint. There was no remorse, no humanity, only cold numbers and plots to destroy rivals, arranged like a grandmaster on a chessboard. When this tape was delivered to the newsroom of Hollywood's most powerful tabloid at the time, the virtuous image she had painstakingly constructed over decades collapsed in an instant. It was a humiliating moment she could never cleanse, as her own voice became the ultimate evidence of her profound hypocrisy, transforming the beloved national mother into one of the most heavily blacklisted names in cinematic history. 5. Raymond St. Jacques, The Horrific Game of Abuse, and the 8mm film Unmasking a Tyrant. Raymond St. Jacques once stepped onto movie sets with the absolute bearing of a king. With his elegant visage and commanding aura, he was an icon every director despaired to secure for their projects. Yet behind that radiant, blinding glare, the set was no sanctuary of creativity. It was the dominion of a dehumanized tyrant. For decades, the grim truth remained buried beneath layers of velvet curtains until a fateful 8mm film reel was unleashed, exposing a reality that sent a collective shiver down the spine of Hollywood. The gatekeeper to this living hell was a young production assistant who endured the darkest days of his life under St. Jacques' thumb, during a private, cocaine-fueled party on set, where the boundaries between man and beast dissolved. Saint Jacques transformed the assistant into a twisted plaything, The young man was forced down onto his knees on the polished wooden floor, serving as a living table for the actor to rest his tray of liquor and narcotics upon his back. As the drugs and alcohol took hold, Saint Jacques spiraled into madness. He used the rigid heels of his leather shoes to repeatedly strike the assistant's hands in a cruel, sadistic game, all while roaring venomous insults. "I am the god of this set, and the rest of you are nothing but garbage." The 8mm footage captured the entire grim spectacle, not just the frenzied destruction of stage props, but the horrifying moment Saint. Jacques grabbed his respected director by the collar and spat directly into his face over a minor note about production schedules. This was no fleeting intoxication. It was the naked essence of a tyrant convinced of his absolute invulnerability. Carrying a crushing, profound humiliation, the assistant secretly stashed the reel away like a life insurance policy, a final weapon of self-defense. He tasted bitter desperation when a profoundly arrogant Saint. Jacques weaponized his influence to blacklist the young man across every major studio, a ruthless bid to silence the witness forever. Driven into a corner with nowhere left to turn, the assistant delivered his lethal strike. The tape was smuggled directly to an underground Hollywood news outlet, and that very night, the monument of Raymond St. Jacques crumbled into ash. The public no longer saw an elegant, legendary artist. They saw a depraved monster, a soulless abuser. Absolute shock paralyzed his devotees as they realized they had spent years idolizing a wolf in sheep's clothing. Though his name lingers in historical archives, from the exact second that tape was laid bare, his legacy was permanently cast into outer darkness, an indelible, chilling stain on the history of American cinema. 6. Thalmus Rasulala, the Faustian Pact, and the 8-minute humiliation permanently erased by Hollywood. That night, the silence backstage at the Hollywood studio in November 1982 was not peaceful. It was the suffocating atmosphere of a prearranged trap. Amidst the vast expanse of the studio, where industrial spotlights cast harsh, contrasting blocks of light and shadow across the weathered wooden floor, Thalmus Rasulala, a star at the peak of his career, remained utterly oblivious that every step he took, every heavy breath he drew, was being watched. His rival and ambitious second-rate director had spent half a year's worth of earnings to bribe Thalmus's personal assistant. This assistant, a man who had stood by Thalmus's side for 5 grueling years, was now lurking behind the black backdrops, a compact Super 8 camera sophisticatedly camouflaged inside a prop bag. The scene unfolded at 2 a.m., just as the wrap party officially ended, leaving behind only the wreckage of spilled liquor glasses and scattered cigarette butts on the polished wooden tables. Drunk and distraught after a producer abruptly informed him that his name had been scratched from the biggest project of his career, Thalmus lost his usual composure. In the jaundiced, flickering glow of the late-night studio, he became an unscripted actor, a man brought to his knees by a brutal reality. The 8-minute tape was far more than mere footage of Thalmus in a drunken stupor. It was a visual execution filmed in the dark confines of the green room. It began with him screaming, hurling furious words into the darkness, where he imagined the gatekeepers of power sat, passing judgment on him. But then the camera slithered to a more ruthless angle, a close-up of his face as he collapsed onto the floor. His expensive leather shoes were soiled by spilled liquor. His heavy makeup, smeared by sweat and tears, formed gruesome black streaks across his face like grotesque scars. The assistant had intentionally adjusted the light from a single desk lamp, casting elongated shadows on the wall to emphasize the trembling, helpless state of an A-list star who had just been stripped of his throne. He wasn't just recording, he was directing the annihilation of an icon in his weakest, most naked hour. When the tape was unleashed at 7 a.m. the next morning, delivered straight to the desks of media moguls, the fallout spread like a virulent poison. In less than 48 hours, Thalmus Rasulala's reputation was reduced to ashes. From major studios to luxury brands, every tie was severed. Thalmus barricaded himself inside his downtown penthouse, where the haunting images from that 8-minute tape plagued his mind like an inescapable phantom. He never regained his confidence, nor did he ever reclaim his signature poise. The assistant's betrayal left him a man consumed by bitterness and paranoia, living in constant terror of who would drive the next knife into his back. The tragic saga of Thalmus Rasulala stands as one of the darkest chapters in Hollywood history, a chilling testament to how a man can be completely erased in a mere 8 minutes of betrayal, orchestrated by the very soul he trusted most. 7. Trina Parks, the 8-minute death sentence of the fallen goddess. The 1978 gala in the luxury hotel lobby was no venue for Trina Parks to shine. It was the stage for a meticulously orchestrated purge. Creeping behind massive marble pillars, her closest assistant, a man she once considered family, the keeper of her deepest secrets regarding her addiction and private affairs, tightened his grip on a camera hidden inside his buttonhole. He was no loyal servant. He was a professional spy planted by her rival 2 years prior, a patient nobody with a singular grim mission: to destroy Trina from the inside out. The nightmare exploded when an executive threw her contract directly into her face before high society, coldly announcing her role had been stripped because her services were no longer of value. Her pride shattered, Trina collapsed onto the freezing stone floor. With supreme malice, her assistant had deliberately plied her with hard liquor moments earlier, whispering poisonous sweet nothings about the injustice of the film industry to feed her rage. In a delirium of alcohol and severe psychological shock, Trina fell to her knees at the executive's feet, clutching the hem of his trousers to beg, screaming out the sordid details of her past sexual transactions. At that horrific moment, she was no star. She was an expired commodity clawing at the pity of the man who had just discarded her. As security arrived and dragged Trina away like a sack of garbage, her magnificent evening gown was pulled askew, exposing her body to the relentless, blinding flashbulbs of the paparazzi. The assistant stood by, silently recording the absolute humiliation of the goddess stripped of her glamorous mask. This 8-minute tape was sent inside sealed envelopes directly to the desks of Hollywood's 10 most powerful entertainment editors. He left her honor to be torn apart by these media vultures in a prolonged smear campaign, ensuring Trina had no escape. The fallout triggered a catastrophic chain reaction, completely erasing the legacy Trina Parks had built. In less than 48 hours, all her endorsement contracts were canceled, and her coveted title of Goddess was replaced by the headline, "Corrupt Psychopath," across tabloid front pages. Investors who once chased her now turned away as if she carried a highly contagious disease. The humiliation bled deep into her personal life. Trina was disowned by her family, and close friends severed ties to protect their own reputations. Plunging into severe clinical depression, the clandestine footage haunted her sleep, turning every step outside into a desperate flight from the judgmental eyes of strangers. The cruelty peaked when the assistant chose not to vanish after fulfilling his hit. Instead, he stepped into the light as a self-proclaimed honest witness, giving exclusive interviews claiming he could no longer endure Trina's madness and was forced to film her for self-defense. This perfect lie completely whitewashed his crime, transforming the villain into a righteous hero in the public eye while permanently nailing Trina to the pillar of eternal shame. The tragic saga of Trina Parks became Hollywood's bitterest lesson, a place where loyalty is merely a commodity, and a star's catastrophic downfall is the most lucrative entertainment for whoever tells the crueler story. 8. Scoey Mitchell, The Hero's Mask, and When Ideals Become Merchandise. In the dim, suffocating light of a locked boardroom at the television network headquarters, Scoey Mitchell, the revered champion for the rights of the black community, sat among the allies he trusted with his life. He was blissfully unaware that right beneath the table, a specialized digital recording device was silently devouring his every word. The hand that planted it did not belong to a rogue reporter, but to the network's own audio engineer, who had pocketed a handsome bounty from a rival producer to transform this room into a fatal trap. Across those 8 haunting minutes of tape, the noble artist Mitchell had meticulously constructed collapsed into ash. Instead of fiery rhetoric on social justice, a sinister, unmasked Scoey Mitchell emerged, mocking and deriding his own fiercely loyal fans as idiots waiting to be led. In a dripping, dismissive sneer, he casually bartered with the producer to shave down every jagged political message in the script. To him, the civil rights movements he championed were nothing but a cheap gimmick to juice ratings and a ladder to extort a record-breaking paycheck. It was the horrific unmasking of a ruthless profiteer, a man who built a lucrative empire on the very collective trauma he was eager to sell out with a single nod. A twisted stroke of fate struck when an assistant carelessly lost a copy of the tape at a packed lounge. That damning piece of evidence fell directly into the hands of a cutthroat attorney representing the very network Mitchell worked for. Upon hearing the mocking laughter on the reel, the media moguls realized that if the public ever unearthed this grotesque truth, it would not only incinerate Mitchell's career, but plunge the entire television network into a fatal crisis of faith. They didn't leak it for profit. They weaponized absolute legal supremacy to suffocate it. In a lightning-fast maneuver, the network clawed back every duplicate tape using ironclad legal threats. They imposed an immediate, absolute media blackout on Mitchell, instantly mutating him from a soaring icon into a completely isolated phantom without a word of explanation. A merciless non-disclosure agreement was slapped onto the table, forcing Mitchell into absolute silence regarding his future. That 8-minute tape was sealed away in the corporation's classified vaults, lingering as a ghost in the shadows. Scoey Mitchell's career did not end with an explosive bang. It suffocated slowly in cold oblivion, a terrifying parable of how an icon can crumble to ash the moment the mask is violently ripped away by his own buried, parasitic ambitions. 9. Judy Pace, The Beverly Hills Execution Night and the Buried Frames of Humiliation. In Hollywood, the distance between a silver screen deity and a wretched sinner is exactly 30 seconds. That is just enough time for decades of a glamorous image to be completely incinerated. A moment when the masks of fame do not merely fall away, but are violently shredded right beneath the lens of a traitor. Los Angeles, 1974. The atmosphere inside the VIP lounge of the Beverly Hills Hotel that night was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, premium liquor, and the sickening hypocrisy of superficial handshakes. The center of attention was an A-list actor, the man who had just used his omnipotent influence to scratch out Judy Pace from her career-defining film project. He stood there, flanked by studio executives and his aristocratic wife, his triumphant smile gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. He was the very embodiment of invulnerability, a god desired by millions of women. But right beneath the banquet table, in the shadows of cold calculation, a camera assistant held his breath, aiming the lens of an 8mm camera straight at his face. This was no celebration. It was a meticulously orchestrated execution of honor, staged for pure revenge. When Judy Pace approached, she did not scream like a lunatic. Her voice was ice cold, sharp as a surgical scalpel, cutting clean through the melodic music. She began to expose dark backroom deals, the names of secret mistresses he hid in the dark, and the illicit funds used to bribe prestigious awards. Every word she uttered was a dagger plunged straight into the heart of the counterfeit empire he had painstakingly constructed. The smug smile on the actor's face froze, then melted into sheer, unadulterated panic as he realized he was being stripped bare before the very individuals who held absolute sovereignty over his career. The exact moment the crystal glass slipped from his hand, the piercing shatter rang out like a gunshot, instantly killing the party atmosphere. Panic violently seized his nervous system, forcing his body to betray its own master. His high-end trousers darkened in an instant due to a sudden loss of bladder control. The image of a silver screen deity was instantaneously reduced to a trembling wreck. He stood paralyzed in a puddle of red wine, his face completely drained of color, his eyes casting a desperate, pleading gaze toward his petrified wife. The tape captured a suffocating, terrifying silence as everyone around them froze, witnessing this absolute ruler of Hollywood mutate into a wounded wild beast, humiliated, wretched, and pathetic in the middle of the most luxurious banquet. This incident should have been the media bombshell of the century, but that very night, the studio activated its ruthless, clean sweep protocol. They prevented the tape from ever reaching the press, choking it at the source with a massive financial settlement and forcing every witness to sign the most draconian non-disclosure agreement in history. A 50-year silence pact. They hunted down every duplicate copy, threatening anyone who dared open their mouth with absolute financial ruin. 10. Gloria Foster. The naked underground footage and the Beverly Hilton parking garage assault erased by Hollywood. In Hollywood, the distance between a silver screen goddess and a helpless victim is often just a single parking garage door. When the spotlights fade, the masks of fame do not gently slip away. They are violently ripped to shreds, leaving behind a raw, naked reality that no one wishes to behold. November 1982. The Beverly Hilton Hotel was steeped in the arrogant atmosphere of Los Angeles's ultimate luxury. That night belonged to Gloria Foster, a monument of majesty and intellect. Cloaked in a magnificent evening gown, she moved like a queen, her poised and dignified smile captivating hundreds of camera lenses. To the public, Gloria was a flawless entity, a woman in absolute control of every situation. But the moment the grand ballroom's radiant glare died down, she did not return to adoration. Instead, she slipped quietly into the bleak, freezing stillness of the subterranean parking garage, where the jaundiced glow of outdated light bulbs waited to swallow the grim truth behind the aura. A valet parking attendant, inadvertently concealed behind concrete pillars, became the most ruthless judge of a painful private moment. Through the lens of a handheld camera, a stark reality was frozen forever. In a squalid, dark corner, Gloria Foster, the newly acclaimed screen queen, was being violently grabbed by the hair and dragged away by her partner. It was not merely violence, it was the ultimate degradation of human dignity. Her magnificent evening gown was pulled askew, her majestic hair disheveled, and that face was utterly stripped of its poise and command. The true horror of the tape did not lie within the act of violence itself, but in the total violation of her right to hide her vulnerability. The lens captured her trembling, her vacant eyes paralyzed with panic, her choked pleas for privacy suffocating in the dead silence of the garage. For someone who had meticulously engineered an image of absolute control, being filmed covertly in a state of subjugation, stripped of all grace, was a definitive death sentence to her self-esteem. It was the exact moment she was robbed of the very persona the public idolized, mutating from a powerful woman into a wretched prey before the eyes of the cowering cameraman. That footage was never permitted to see the light of day, not because it wasn't real, but because it was too brutal. In less than a week, Hollywood's apparatus of power intervened. A law firm representing the studio tracked down the attendant, arriving not to negotiate, but to enforce a permanent mandate. They paid an unimaginable sum of money to buy out the camera and every duplicate reel. Under strict legal supervision, the film was incinerated into ash, and anyone involved was forced to sign lifelong non-disclosure agreements. Today, that footage remains nothing but a phantom, lingering in the memories of the few hotel workers from that year. They still whisper about that November night at the Beverly Hilton like an unhealing scar, living proof that even the most brilliant stars can be violently crushed by the darkness. If not for the ruthless studio moguls orchestrating everything from the shadows. 11. Carol Speed, the 1974 closed-door trap, and the iron shackles of a living nightmare. In Hollywood, life-changing tickets are often painted with the glamorous veneer of million-dollar contracts. But for Carol Speed, An invitation to a private meeting regarding a career-defining film project in 1974 was not a breakthrough, but the genesis of an eternal nightmare. She stepped into that room with the naive trust of a young star, utterly oblivious that she was walking into a meticulously orchestrated, predatory game. Her ex-boyfriend, a man she still foolishly trusted, was the effective pawn hired by the studio to lure her into this deadly trap. The moment she sipped the sweet wine, Carol began to feel a chilling difference. The liquid was laced with a potent sedative, causing her body to rapidly lose all control. In that precise instant, the ultimate degradation began as paralysis invaded every muscle fiber, stripping away her ability to resist. The studio power brokers, who always maintained a dignified public image, transformed into ruthless predators. Right on top of the freezing banquet table, amidst the mocking laughter of her abusers, they reduced a talented actress's body into a twisted plaything. Yet the most agonizing humiliation of her life did not just lie in the abuse itself, but in the camera lens of her ex-boyfriend, which was recording every single second. That merciless lens spared no detail. It zoomed in on Carol's tear-filled eyes, capturing her despair and agony as her mind remained completely lucid while trapped inside a paralyzed body. The camera panned over the futile remnants of her resistance, documenting her raw exposure and degradation in a completely defenseless state. This was not merely a physical violation. It was the systematic execution of human dignity. The studio had no intention of hiding the tape. Instead, they forged it into a set of iron shackles. For years to follow, Carol Speed was coerced into accepting cheap roles and degrading scripts for starvation wages, all to prevent this toxic leverage from being unleashed. Yet no matter how deeply a secret is buried, it eventually rots. 10 years later, as the studio faced a severe financial crisis and massive layoffs, an archival manager, who had witnessed this cruelty day after day, decided to exact justice through the most vicious form of revenge. Enraged by being fired without a single penny of severance, he stole the fateful film reel and leaked it onto the black market to an underground newsbroker. The footage became a depraved form of underground entertainment, permanently obliterating Carol Speed's honor. When the frames of that horrific night were finally laid bare, all that remained of Carol was the ashes of her career. She was not only a casualty of her abusers, but a victim of an entire system powered by human humiliation. 12. Herbert Jefferson Jr. The collapse of a gentleman and the humiliating ban from the set. In the 1978 cinematic landscape, Herbert Jefferson Jr. was viewed as the gold standard of discipline and professionalism. On sci-fi sets across California, he was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, constructing a flawless facade of a dedicated gentleman. Yet that polished armor shattered in a heartbeat when a crew member inadvertently trained a camera lens directly on the ruin of his character. One October afternoon, during a production recess on a major sci-fi project, Jefferson's calm demeanor vanished. He was caught cornering a female production assistant in a secluded spot near a mobile trailer, an encounter that escalated from verbal threats into a violent assault. At that exact moment, the lead director walked past and witnessed it all. Without demanding an explanation, the director pointed straight at his face and ordered, "Get off my set immediately!" And the footage captured not only the director's fury, but frozen in time, Jefferson's terrifying disintegration, his face mutating from confident aggression to a hollow pale as his composure dissolved before the entire crew. The true horror of the tape, what transformed it into a monument of supreme humiliation, was not the initial capture, but the immediate aftermath. Offering no resistance or excuse, Herbert Jefferson Jr. sank into pathetic resignation. The hidden lens captured him slinking away, huddled outside the studio's iron gates, waiting for a ride in absolute isolation. It was the naked portrait of a true exile, a once revered star cowering beneath the contemptuous glares of passing colleagues. He was no longer a gentleman. He was an exposed sinner, tasting total rejection right in front of the lens that stole his true identity. This incident should have ended Jefferson's career, but powerful Hollywood moguls intervened just in time. The Actors Union and the production house immediately launched a reputation salvage campaign. To smother a public harassment scandal that could destroy both the film and the studio's prestige, they forced every witness to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. The original reel was promptly confiscated and destroyed under legal supervision. Today, the press remains silent, but for those present on the lot that day, the image of Herbert Jefferson Jr. shivering by the iron gates stands as a stark testament to the fragility of fame. When the mask of a gentleman is violently ripped away by a lens, nothing remains but permanently frozen disgrace. Hollywood protects its stars not just with money, but with a cold, enforced silence that covers up the moment a revered icon is revealed as a coward. 13. Dick Anthony Williams, the fatal gambit of collapse. On screen, Dick Anthony Williams embodied the ultimate rogue, a familiar face projecting a cold, reckless, and authoritative aura. Audiences remembered him for roles defined by raw masculinity and grit. Yet, in the early hours of October 14, 1985, deep within a derelict warehouse basement in Los Angeles' Koreatown, that iron mask shattered completely, leaving behind a humiliating moment that Hollywood deployed its full legal power to erase. That night, the basement air was thick with cheap cigarette smoke and the raw stench of cash. Wagers piled high across makeshift tables, stacks of currency testifying to the spiraling debts of fading stars. When the Vice Squad executed a sudden raid, thundering door crashes and barking police commands shattered the silence. Williams, clutching a winning hand, froze instantly. As flashbulbs from the accompanying press strobed relentlessly, his movie star composure vanished, replaced by the naked panic of a criminal caught red-handed. The ultimate horror of the humiliation did not stem from his arrest, but from his unraveled, hysterical reaction right in front of the lens. The man who usually played ruthless heavies was now groveling on the floor amidst scattered bills, his face ghostly pale, his eyes wild, and his body shivering in terror. Instead of maintaining a dignified silence, he erupted into pathetic begging, pleading with officers to shield his face from the press. He weaponized his fame to threaten, then used trembling words to bargain, mutating from an icon of power into a creature of absolute dread. The humiliation lay in the absolute rupture between silver screen illusion and grim reality. The camera lens served as a cruel witness, freezing forever the image of an idolized star begging for mercy in the most undignified posture imaginable. A close-up zoom on his panicked eyes and trembling hands trying to mask his face became the definitive footage exposing the truth behind the counterfeit glamour. A man who portrayed kings of the game was stripped bare by a lens to reveal a wretched, pathetic loser. This raw footage of him in handcuffs, kneeling and begging, was undeniable proof of the depraved lifestyle hidden beneath his glossy exterior. It was the definitive death knell for the tough guy persona he had meticulously crafted. Had those frames bled onto the front pages of local newspapers the following morning, his career would have instantly ended under a wave of public rejection. Fully aware of the catastrophic payload those images carried, studio moguls launched an emergency intervention. Armed with immense legal resources, they bought out all original film reels and crime scene photographs directly from the media. Every trace of that midnight raid was swept up and destroyed in the dark. Today, the fall of Dick Anthony Williams lives only within classified police files and the memories of those present. Hollywood successfully protected his movie star facade, but no force can alter the truth. Beneath a lens that captured his true self, the silver screen's ultimate villain once knelt in absolute terror. Orton, Mary Alice, the devastating erosion of pride. Throughout the 1980s, Mary Alice personified poise and unyielding self-respect. On screen, she typically portrayed powerful, discerning women who always commanded the game. Yet, behind the closed doors of her luxury apartment on an autumn night in 1988, that formidable fortress collapsed in agonizing fashion. The shattering crashes echoing through the rooms did not belong to a movie scene. They were the catastrophic sounds of a life betrayed by the very manager she trusted most. Her fury did not erupt without cause. Upon discovering that her manager had systematically embezzled the bulk of her hard-earned career savings, Mary Alice, a woman who always maintained an icy, untouchable exterior, lost all control under the influence of alcohol. Inside the luxury apartment, shattered fragments of priceless belongings littered the floor, mirroring the broken pieces of her own life. However, this incident would have remained a standard civil dispute if not for a predator lurking in the shadows, camera in hand, silently recording her entire downfall. The most humiliating moment on that tape was not her destructive outburst, but the exact second her knees hit the floor, her trembling hands desperately gripping her manager's legs as she begged. A screen queen, once revered for her noble aura, was now groveling at the feet of the man who had deceived her, pleading to recover what she had rightfully earned. It was the absolute annihilation of her pride. The camera lens zoomed in for a stark close-up of her tear-blurred eyes, her pale face, and the complete helplessness of a woman stripped of both her fortune and her final shred of self-respect. It was undeniable proof of a human being driven to the absolute edge. This footage was never released to the public, but its mere existence loomed like a phantom over her reputation. Well aware of the catastrophic damage those images would inflict if leaked, Mary Alice chose the harshest path for herself: total seclusion. For 5 long years, she vanished completely from the public eye, skipping red carpets, refusing interviews, and shielding herself from the gaze of her fans. That half-decade of absolute silence was her desperate attempt to heal the deep psychological scars left by the moment of humiliation frozen forever on that tape. For Mary Alice, the tape was not merely evidence of a dispute, it was a brutal record exposing her absolute weakest moment. And sometimes, the agony of being witnessed in your most wretched state is far more horrific than any punishment a court of law could ever hand down. Candy Ward, the secretly recorded humiliation in a Las Vegas political gambit. In 1979, Las Vegas was a sanctuary of glittering dreams and inescapable traps. Candy Ward, an actress on the precipice of making a name for herself, believed she had reached the pinnacle of her career when she was invited to an exclusive, closed-door party in a luxury hotel's VIP suite. She thought she was entering high society. In reality, she was stepping directly into a meticulously orchestrated political trap, a mere pawn weaponized for a war among the ruling elite. That night, the room drowned in heavy alcohol and uninhibited debauchery. Government officials, men who fiercely preached morality to the public, shed their pristine masks entirely. The hand behind the lens did not belong to a rogue reporter, but to the hotel manager, bought and paid for by the political opposition. He had covertly installed a camera hidden directly behind the mirror, capturing the exact moment Candy Ward was dragged into a vortex of sin. The ultimate horror of that night lay not within her actions, but in the brutal violation of her basic human privacy. The camera zoomed in tightly on her unraveled face, freezing her utter helplessness as she was reduced to a mere commodity, paraded for the amusement of those in power. For the opposition, the footage was a flawless political weapon. They wielded it as blackmail leverage, forcing the cornered officials into submission over highly controversial bills. Once their dark agenda was secured, Candy Ward was discarded like a worthless token. The studio abruptly terminated her contract, the mainstream media turned its back on her, and she was permanently branded a scandalous pariah, ensuring her career had absolutely no avenue of escape. The grim truth only bled out years later through a drunken confession from the hotel manager himself. "I wasn't recording a human being. I was recording a packaged piece of evidence." And he admitted he was heavily compensated to turn Candy into a permanent stain on political history. Candy Ward vanished forever from the spotlight, leaving behind a name synonymous with a illicit black tape, a heartbreaking testament that in the grand games of the ruling elite, stars like her often pay the ultimate price: their dignity, frozen eternally beneath a predatory lens. 17. Harry Rhodes, the frozen frames of humiliation beneath a traitor's lens. In June 1982, the Hollywood studio canteen ceased to be a place for lunch and transformed into a stage for psychological torture. Harry Rhodes, a pioneering star, was cornered by producers in the middle of a break. There were no cameras for the production, only a hidden device planted by a compromised assistant. Under the threat of being erased from the industry, Rhodes was forced to perform the most ridiculous, cheap, and racially demeaning tropes right in front of his peers. The lens captured his ghastly pale face and a smile so twisted and forced it revealed a man stripped of all agency. That tape was never intended for a film. It became a tool for extortion. Every time Rhodes attempted to speak up for his rights, the tape was brandished as a weapon. It wasn't archival footage. It was a shackle designed to force his silence until his dying day. It was only after Rhodes passed away that his journal, The Outsider's Diary, finally exposed the truth. He described his final years living in paralyzing fear, knowing the tape remained locked in a studio safe, ready to be unleashed to incinerate his legacy at any moment. This is how Hollywood crushed human dignity. They didn't need to commit murder. They forced the artist to hold the knife and stab his own self-respect while the enemy's lens watched. 17 names, 17 shattered lives, 17 indelible scars carved forever into the dark history of Hollywood. We hope these haunting frames have unveiled the grim reality lurking behind the gilded curtain of fame, a place where the camera lens records not art, but cold, unadulterated cruelty. If you value these raw truths and wish to continue unearthing Hollywood's buried black files with us, please like to support our work. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss a future expose. Thank you for walking this dark journey with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next chapter.